a juicy topic, and it's going to continue through May, and you will learn, and you will relearn, and you will find different ways to understand what we're about to throw at you. So, and without further ado, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Naisha Winters.
Very, very excited to have this huge turnout for the first night of our launch of our usual spring lecture series. I would love just to get a sign of hands here to see how many of you have joined us with these series before. Yay, all the returnees and brand spanking newbies. Do you mind raising? Thank you. So it's about a 50-50. For those of you who do not already walk into the doors of Namaste Health Center, which I'm hardly seeing a single unfamiliar face in here. I think you've all done your time at Namaste over the years. But you will notice that we work collaboratively. We really are a team. We really are a family. We have a lot of fun. It's rarely a dull moment over there. It feels kind of weird without Oli in here with the flappy arms right now. He'll be joining us again for the next talk on April 1st, but he is in India right now. He'll have been there for a total of 6 weeks. By the time he comes home, he's doing a much needed, much deserved sabbatical. He's changing his epigenetic landscape as we speak and enjoying it tremendously. But basically, we try and bring these lecture series to you every year and change your lives, change your perspectives, and we try to bring things to the table that are relatively new and cutting edge. It only seems like a few short years ago, we brought the idea of gluten-free to this community, and we were the demons. And many of you, I see some familiar faces that were at some of those first discussions about the importance of really looking at the gluten of today and how it's impacted us. And now we literally get letters from restaurateurs in this town saying, we'd love to introduce you to our new gluten-free menu. Where they used to be like, there's those crazy gluten-free people again. So we'd like to think that anytime we do one of these spring series, we start to change within our own terrain, within our own climate at Namaste, but also within our practice with all of you. And then it definitely spills out over into the community and beyond. So we thank you for being willing and open to learning and sharing with us and continuing this fun process. So that being said, I'm a little out of it because Steve and I just came back last night from an incredible practitioner training we did in Denver, trying to teach other doctors around the country what we do at Namaste, and hope that we're spreading little pods of this around. It was really successful, but I am really fried, and I pulled this together last night at about 10 o'clock. So that's my disclaimer, so here we go. Epigenetics, the landscape for our health. And I'm going to take you on a little tiny journey, but you have to get incredibly quiet to hear this because we don't have good speakers. So, let's see what happens. What do I do with that?
Push the little button on. There you go.
Can you hear it? It's really quiet. All right. You get the idea. How many of you were raised on this, either the books or the TV show?
Or both.
Exactly, or both. So I will often, as many of you have either been with me in practice or in retreat, or just hear me saying from the sidelines, I usually use the Little House on the Prairie analogy a lot with all of my new patients. And I'm going to be using it tonight, partly because I am a Kansas girl, and I actually did get to go to this original homestead for a field trip when I was a child. So it haunts me to this day in a good way. But perhaps that might have been the seed that was planted that has me having these conversations with you tonight. But I would like to take you on a little journey before we dive into what's going to happen for the next few weeks. Let's walk through a day in the life of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So I invite you to just take a deep breath and close your eyes. There's nothing exciting happening on the screen or behind this podium for at least a few minutes. And imagine this time of year, maybe on the plains of Kansas or Nebraska or Oklahoma, and imagine waking up with the sunrise, even a little bit before, so that you can get out and grab some kindling and firewood that you yourself have chopped over, many, many months while the season was warmer. And you'd get that into your little hearth and in your fireplace in your little one-room cabin to get it warmed up before the rest of your family members arise, the rest of your children that have shared the same bed with you through the night. And you know that your nature calls pretty early on as soon as you're up and out of bed, so you've got to throw on your warm boots and your layers of clothing and your gloves and head out to the outhouse just on the way out there. No running water, no warmed seat covers, no bidets, nothing of any of that type of luxury. In fact, in many of those outhouses, there were two side by side, so you could have another person sitting right there with you having a chat about the way the day is beginning. Then you might walk down, however long it takes for you to walk down to the creek to gather, maybe chip through the ice and gather a little bit of fresh water to haul back up to your cabin to start cooking up water, maybe for tea or coffee. Of course, cowboy coffee style. I've got a great pro cowboy coffee maker in the back of the room. And maybe start to prepare the day. Everyone starts to slowly wake, and the kids might know that their duties are on to go out and take care of the livestock. Maybe grab some food from the root cellar that's, again, maybe a few hundred yards away from your house that you had to hand dig yourself at one point. It's late enough now in the winter that there's only a few items left, maybe some turnips or some really kind of hardened apples that might be left in there, jerky, a lot of kind of pemmican style dried meats that might be left, maybe some eggs, although that time of year you don't typically have the chickens producing. Hello. Oh, goodbye. And you didn't have that happening. Everything was run by candlelight, everything was run by lanterns. So I want you just to get this idea of what's around you. You rose and went to sleep with the sun. You did hard physical labor just to live moment by moment, day by day with your family. Your family was everything for you. The community around you was everything for you. You didn't have the luxury of running over to Nature's Oasis at 8 a.m. to get, your half and half that you forgot in the morning. You had to be part of and present with the seasons at hand. I want you to think about the amount of work you did or the amount of movement you did every day. At that time, we averaged 4 hours of walking a day. Our vitamin D levels at that time, we've got blood counts from the late 1800s to the early 1900s that showed that our average vitamin D level was around 115, whereas today that same vitamin D level is at about 30. Okay. Part of that is not because the sun is scary and dangerous and we must hide from it, but part of it is the way we attend to our hygiene. At that time with Laurel Ingalls Wilder, you were lucky if you got a weekly bath. Most of the time it was just a little bit of a pits and parts kind of approach. And the soap you had access to was actually soap, rendered from lard from the animals that you yourself raised and often killed on your own property to eat, to nourish you. And it was not the detergents of today, which are the soaps, body care products that actually wash away our protective layer on our skin and absolutely wash away the vitamin D levels that take 3 days to synthesize through our skin. And then, of course, today we spend all of our time indoors. Even in the coldest of cold, you were outdoors dealing with what needed to be dealt with in those times. You went to bed with the sun, because what else were you going to do? You couldn't watch a video. You couldn't Skype. You couldn't, talk to your, Facebook time with your friends and whatnot. So you went to bed, and you slept longer in the darker days and less in the lighter days. And your nourishment followed those seasons as well. So I paint this picture because I get this question all of the time, and it might even be a question that's on your mind, is why are we so sick today? What's going on? What's different? And hopefully I'm kind of painting a picture that shows you a few examples of that. But even in my lifetime, I remember rising and sleeping. I grew up in Kansas on farms in the summertime, and we were at the mercy of grain season. I mean, how ironic that my family were wheat farmers. Now that I can't touch that stuff, there's lots of good reasons. But basically, you were in a simpler time. We'd go out and pick the vegetables from the garden and bring them in, and I'd husk corn and snap peas, and I didn't realize that I was eating Betsy the cow on a pretty regular basis. At that time, it was not in my mind. We'd milk the goats in the morning, but of course we'd put our, what is that awful stuff, our Ovaltine into it. That's an weird thing. That was definitely not right. But basically, I just want you to have a sense that things are a bit different today. So, a couple of differences. Food. I don't even want to go into the specifics of this. I just wanted to kind of give you a general guideline here, an outline, because these are the topics that are going to be fleshed out in the weeks to come. So for instance, Stacy and Jess will be talking to you a little bit in a few minutes just about what they're going to cover with regards to food and our environment. And they really do kind of have to be clumped together because they're absolutely dependent on each other, how they've improved or degraded over time. So we don't often think about food, but we eat, we are what we eat, but also what the animal eats. And today it's very different than it was 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, 125 years ago at the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder's books and family life. How was the animal raised and treated? Again, back in Laura Ingalls Wilder, they knew intimately that animal. They were part of probably literally pulling it out of its mother, raising it and slaughtering it and ingesting it at some point in time. Preservation. We had a very different means of preserving our food. Today we like to do it with chemicals. Luckily we're making a big move to go back to old fermentation ways, and I know that our office has been instrumental in teaching some of those therapies, fermentation and whatnot at our annual cleanses and a lot of our cooking classes. Sugar, just to remind you, if you've heard our talks before, today we ingest so much more sugar than ever before, and a lot of people, especially my patients, say, I don't eat sugar. And when they do a diet diary, and we go through, there's really nothing but sugar on their diet diary. In 1908, we ingested an average of 5 pounds of sugar a year per person, and that included fruit sugars and honey and starches and grains. Today, as of November 2013, we have an updated statistic. A few of you already know this, but does anybody who doesn't know this yet, would they throw out a guess how much sugar we eat per person per year? 30 pounds. 30 pounds. Good answer. Anybody else? 80 pounds. 80 pounds? It is 175 pounds on average. So that means, right, bell-shaped curve. I know.
More weight.
Yeah, exactly. Just a spoonful of sugar helped that medicine go down. So at the 175 pounds on average, can you just already start to think, wow, what has that done to our gene pool in such a relatively short period of time? We were not made to digest that much sugar. Refrigeration changes, shipping changes. We talk a lot about the blueprint we leave, the footprint we leave on the planet today. It's amazing that we can eat papaya this time of year from Hawaii and Durango. Very odd. Of course, now we'll be talking about papaya that's all GMO'd, but that's another story that'll be picked up later in our sessions. We've already talked a little bit about the vitamin D3, but basically the vitamin D3 is from an animal source. If you're still a vegetarian, or a vegan, I should say, and you take a vitamin D supplement, it's D3, you're getting an animal source, so I should probably make you aware of that. As is the D2, the plant source that a lot of vegans will take. It's actually not very bioavailable and has known toxicity. When you hear about toxic levels of vitamin D3, that's often what we're talking about is D2. It gets mixed up in the literature. So with the D3, we're getting that from the skin and the fat of our animals, and they acquire that from the sunshine directly infused into their skin, and also from the grasses that they ate. So when you hear us talk about the importance of grass-fed and grass-finished foods, you'll understand that that's another component. And again, Jess and Stacy, I think you guys are the 29th of April. We'll be going into that here in a bit, but we've got a lot of great talks coming up just on these topics alone. Stacy's going to take it a bit further because also in Laura Ingalls Wilder time, and quite frankly, up until World War II, we didn't have pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. We didn't use hormones. In fact, they weren't really brought onto the market until the late 50s for more widespread use. Antibiotics were relatively new. Vaccines were relatively new. Irradiation is more of a industrial age change that we've brought on since World War II. Fortification. This word should be, it's another F word, quite frankly. And Steve will be going into a little bit of this next time when he talks, because this is where a lot of things kind of picked up momentum. When we started to fortify foods in the early 90s, we really started to mess with our epigenetic expression, because we started to use nutrients that could promote or turn off DNA expression from these synthetic toxic forms that we started to add to all of our processed foods. And if you had to guess, where is the biggest harm done with the fortification? Does anybody know offhand where this has become very scary?
Dairy?
Dairy, actually, that's one of them, but baby formula.
Ew.
That's the main thing. It's all synthetic, fortified synthetic or nutrients that are not what our body intended to be exposed to. And then, of course, GMOs have only been on the market since the mid-1990s, or 1996 in this country, and we are just now starting to hear about the problems because we have a generation, basically, to see where we made those changes. How many of you remember the movie The Graduate? And they talked about, you got to start investing in plastics. It's all going to be plastics. Well, it is all plastics. And we now go, oops, well, BPA is a problem, but guess what? We only call BPA a problem because that's what we've studied. And yet we know that all of the other plastics have endocrine disrupting properties as well. Body care products galore, general hygiene practices. These are the things that Jess is going to dig into. This is her passion, and Stacy's passion as well. Circadian rhythms, we touched on this already. I know that the rest of the crew is going to be touching into this with how it affects our mind and our body and our spirit. But how many of you go to bed with the sun and get up with the sun in this room on a regular basis? Exactly. How many of you try to do that or kind of don't have a choice to do that when you go camping, for instance? Right. And how many of you know of the studies that show that just literally a few nights camping can literally reset and reboot your entire neuroendocrine system? It's pretty amazing stuff, because think about how good you feel typically. First of all, you're in nature, your natural killer cells are being stimulated, you're feeling mighty fine. Your other cycles start to go as well, because if you're sleeping well and you're going into a parasympathetic nervous system state, then your liver is using its phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification, but it's also allowing your peristalsis to go and allowing you to poop. And so as Ole, if he were here, he would talk about it. It's like, we are what we poop. We really are. Things need to be coming through us on a regular basis. And so literally each time you eat, it should trigger or elicit a response to let go of what came before it. And not many of us get to do that these days. In fact, it's probably one of the most common complaints in our practice is digestive complaints, and in particular around constipation. Now, when you're in a mixed circadian rhythm and you're eating poor quality food and you're under constant stress and duress, the last thing you're going to do, evolutionarily speaking, when running from a bear is to stop and drop your trousers in the woods. This is not going to happen. So trying to reboot and get back into a rhythm of nature. We also at the time, we all kind of make fun of the co-sleeping parents today, but my God, in Little House on the Prairie, you were in one room. All activities happened in that one room. And we have gotten very segmented and separated out from our community, our closest community being our family members, as well as from our neighbors and our extended families. And again, we weren't taking hormones or taking other endocrine disrupting medications such as steroids for our asthma and whatnot in those times. We weren't exposed to blue light. How many of you are familiar with the EMFs and the blue light issues in how our brains function or don't function? Anyone? So a lot of people, this is kind of becoming more and more research. One of the things I'd love to have by the time we get to this portion of our talk in the next few weeks is we'll all be sitting around here in orange-colored glasses and orange-lensed glasses, since it's after sunset when we're having these talks. You can literally filter out with things like Flux, re-downloads on your computer screen or on your cell phone. You can literally wear orange, colored glasses in the evenings at your home and put in orange bulbs in the lights in your house and start to mimic that candlelight and that lantern light and start to reset your circadian patterns. This is particularly effective for those of you who have difficulty going to sleep at night. So insomnia is often blue light overstimulation. And then seasons. We are able to travel now. I mean, I spent 6 weeks in Mexico this year in the dead of winter, and it's very confusing on my body to be back and forth from the hot to the cold and everything in between. But typically we were kind of stationary at the time of Laura Ingalls Wilder, where you just got into the rhythm of the seasons. So that's a biggie. And then the stressors, emotions, and thoughts, we're actually, I think, putting 2 to 3 entire evening discussioning on this, because the research around how our thoughts, how our emotions, and how our neuroendocrine signaling and neurotransmitters in our body literally change the way our genes express themselves. And so I'm just curious, I know that Steve had sent us a link recently and we saw it as well, but how many of you have seen the recent study about your effect, the effect on your gene output by your grandmother's life and her traumas? Has anybody been reading this recent study? A few? There was also one a few months ago on NPR, maybe Julia can speak to that if you recall it, but it was an incredible discussion about mothers' impact on the genetic expression of their children. Not just in vitro, like in the womb, but outside in the nature versus nurture environment. And I know Julia is passionate about this piece and is going to be sharing. I don't want it to sound like, oh, it's all about this, blame those mothers, because we've gotten really good at that over this time. But what is so amazing is how you can change at any time your genetic expression. It's never too late. We have 80-something-year-old patients who are changing the way their genes are expressing themselves, and we have babies that are just a thought in somebody's eye while we're working on mom and dad's methylation and their NTHFR gene expression to help them even conceive that child to begin with. So we cover both ends of the spectrum in these next several sessions together. And then one of the biggest is the impact of movement. And so how many of us do daily move our body 4 to 5 hours, chop wood and carry water? You're lucky if you get that chance. Great. I mean, that's a biggie. But at the same token, if you are doing a lot of movement today, a lot of us overdo it in a place where we might be uber athletes, and so we might be really physically fit, but we keep feeding our body all the poisons that keep dismantling our DNA. So that's kind of the overview of where we're going to dig into a little more of the nitty-gritty in the weeks to come. I wanted to present some of these ideas before we take this any further. But I wanted you to get another kind of visual perspective of it. Think of kind of a bullseye. And in that bullseye, you could put whatever condition you're currently dealing with in the dis-ease target zone, and know that it's not, I have this one thing causing this one problem. It doesn't happen that way. It's a collection of problems. So that dis-ease word could say osteoarthritis, diabetes, cancer. It could say anything, heart disease. And so what I want you to see is how it all impacts everything. So for instance, plastics in our environment impact inflammation. They literally change our hormonal balance, cause vascular damage. So there's some interesting studies recently about BPA causing an increased risk of blood clots. Well, that's its impact there. Insulin resistance. You can't tug on one thread of this little target up here and not impact the whole. But also, opposite of that is you can build upon or improve upon or support one component with something as simple as reducing your environmental toxins and have a positive impact. Or lower your stress level or your response to stress. Maybe get into a meditation program and change this environment. Or maybe make some significant diet or even not so significant diet and lifestyle changes that can start to change these patterns that take you closer and closer to that center of disease. And so what I want you to see is that basically each and every one of these disease patterns or instigating factors or diet, lifestyle, environment components respond and interact at every single moment with every single cell in your body, which contains mitochondria, where all of these little pathways are happening that Steve's going to tell you more about next month or than you ever thought you possibly wanted to hear. And it's specific to this idea of something we call SNPs. That'll make it easy. Here's the word. How many of you have heard the concept of SNPs? Great. So quite a few of you. Single nucleotide polymorphisms. I like to think of it as a hiccup to your genes, that they're kind of cruising along and you have this a little tiny road bump. It's not so bad that that's what you're stuck with from being born with that and stuck forever. It's not so bad that it's non-changeable. You can't necessarily take away the SNP, but you can definitely bypass it and make it work better for you. And Steve, as well as the rest of the group, is going to be going into details on exactly how to do that and the research behind it. And so I should probably back up again. Like, what the heck is epigenetics? How many of you have heard of that term before this being posted as a lecture series? So less and less, as the numbers are dwindling as we get deeper into these concepts, but I promise you, now that you've heard it once, you'll hear it everywhere. It really is becoming part of our day-to-day discussion. And it literally means above or on top of genetics. It's external modifications, so recall that little bullseye image, external effects on the DNA that literally tell the DNA to wake up or go to sleep. It's not a blockade, it's more of a dial, like a volume switch of like, we can make this amplify a little bit more or quiet it down a little bit more, whatever's needed. A good example of this that most people are aware of, and I should just put this out there, how many of you know about Angelina Jolie and her removed breasts? Okay, so a few of you. So she made big headlines and made all kinds of news, and a lot of people are literally, we saw stocks go up in genetic testing and stocks go up in breast implant after her story came to be, because a lot of women quickly signed up thinking, well, I'm just going to go hack those things off because I have this gene like Angelina Jolie, and therefore I'll be safe and I'll live to watch my children and grandchildren grow up. I think she set us back 10 years. I'll just be really frank. And she's getting ready to do it again with her ovaries. So just wait for that news flash. But basically, when you have a BRCA, a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, the information that was out there from the 90s when it first came out was this was a gene expression that increased your risk of certain cancers. And so therefore, the great advice of our conventional medicine was to remove those organs, those diseased organs, before they get the disease. And I'm here to tell you, as someone who practices exclusively oncology today, not only is that a bad idea, just in general, but it actually can turn up, like really increase genetic expression in other places, other genetic SNPs, and make things even more aggressive. I've personally had 7 patients who did prophylactic oophorectomies or mastectomies, the removal of their ovaries or the removal of their breasts, because they had the gene and because they'd lost a family member to this disease, who still ended up with the disease, and how 4 of those 7 died from the disease. It does not change your risk factors. What it does, despite what the news is trying to tell you, but the beautiful thing is you can literally know your status and know how to manipulate the turning on or off of that gene and truly change your risk factor and truly prevent it expressing into something far more deadly. So that's where, when you start to look into this, you'll hear it in some of these popular places like Angelina Jolie's situation, but we're hoping to educate you and take you back down the path that's already blazing, where literally all of medicine is heading, is in our ability to biochemically, individually treat and manipulate our gene expression with the way we eat, the way we think, the way we breathe, the way we cultivate our inner sense of well-being. And one of my mentors and colleagues in the field, Dr. Lee Sachelar, she wrote a book called Cancer Decisions, and she herself has gone through breast cancer. And she calls our DNA, like this matrix, she calls it our dynamic molecular soup. And this is where our lifestyle literally influences the matrix content of that soup. So the ingredients of that soup depend on what we choose to put into it or leave out of it. There's also a woman I didn't put up here, but if you've not seen the TED Talk by Nina Bissell like the vacuum cleaner. She has been in research in oncology for, gosh, almost 30 years, I think is where she's at now, but she did this great TED Talk last June, maybe even June before, it's been a while, on the extracellular matrix and its impact on cancer, and she's been that gal going after, it's this one protein and we must get it, and there's a war on cancer, we're gonna find the cause, and we're gonna find the cure. Well, there's no such thing. The thing is this matrix, this soup, if you will, and what she has learned in her research is you can literally change the terrain and change the outcome or the expression of that cancer cell by what you choose to put into the matrix. It's a fascinating TED Talk, 15 minutes of your life well spent. So if you want to Google it, we also have that link on our website, and I'll be giving you more of that information in a moment. So SNPs, this is another, right off Wikipedia, but I love this. It's just variations in the DNA sequence of humans can affect how humans develop diseases and respond to pathogens, chemicals, drugs, vaccines. And I'd like to put in there diets, lifestyles, even herbs and supplements, because now you might go, well, geez, no wonder I didn't respond to that herb because I have a SNP that doesn't allow me to. Or no wonder my vitamin D levels are still so low, no matter how much vitamin D I take, because I have a vitamin D receptor site problem. So you are going to get to see this on a deeper, more, I don't know, kind of elegant level. And of course the other agents is what I'm talking about. But SNPs, and where we're going with medicine today, are critical for personalized medicine. And that's where I feel like we at Namaste Health Center and our colleagues in the field of naturopathic medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, holistic integrated minded medicine, this is what we do every day and have been for a very long time. Now the science is catching up with us. So we're just trying to help them navigate it a little more elegantly. So what controls our cells? And again, I spoke to this a little bit, but the landscape, it might be called, the terrain, the microbiome. Oh my God, the research in the microbiome is so exciting to me. I mean, how many of you have been hearing about the poop implants? Okay, the fecal implants. You hear about probiotics, but we are now literally finding that you cannot digest or absorb your B vitamins if you don't have an intact gut. In fact, your B vitamins in your gut help make more microorganisms. The foods you eat or the foods you avoid build or take away from that little community in your gut. And we are actually going into a phase, first time in human evolution, where we are becoming extinct in certain microbiome. How weird is that? We're always worried about the whales, but we're killing it off within ourselves first. The extracellular matrix, Nina Bissell goes into that in her TED Talk. Some people call it the median. If you're a molecular biologist, that may be the words you use. If you're a biochemist, single nucleotide polymorphisms, or a geneticist, and Steve's going to be talking a lot about those. But ultimately, the fate and health of cells are a complement to their environment. And this is the work of 36 plus years of cell biologist Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's written some really powerful books, not just on how we can change our terrain with diet and lifestyle, but basically how you can change your terrain with your very thoughts. And that's where I know that Boong and Michelle and Tracy will be going deeper. So now what? So I'm going to take a moment and bother, I might have you bring up the lights again here. But in the next few weeks, we're going to educate you on this groundbreaking, world-changing research and information that we've been learning, and we want to share it very enthusiastically, I hope you find, of the why and how of manipulating your genetic blueprint can make your gene expression hum to a healthier, more vital you. And so basically, what you're going to hear. So I'm going to have each of the folks that are up here, minus Oli, who I love the name of his, mindful methylation. That's perfect. But basically, Steve, if you would give just a quick little blip on what you hope to bring to the table on, I believe, April 1st.
How much time do I have?
You get about, each of you get about 3 to 4 minutes. Yeah.
I'm going to need about 5 days.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to change the name of my talk to Mindless Methylation. Because I'm sitting here realizing if I try to launch into biochemical pathways, I'm probably going to lose 90% of you. And it will just be me standing in front of the room, as usual, talking to the screen, and nobody getting anything from it. So, no, but truly, the one thing I need to correct you on, Nate, Oli doesn't say you are what you poop. He says you are what you don't poop.
Oh, that's true. There you go. Thank you.
So what I will be talking about is DNA expression. And so I want to give everybody a little questionnaire really quickly. Who feels good right now?
Yay, look at that.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Oh, that's worse than I expected.
Oh.
The next question is, who felt better 5 years ago? Yeah, who felt better 5 years ago than they feel today? Who felt better 10 years ago than they do today? Who felt better 20 years ago than they do today? Who felt best their first 6 months of their life?
Don't remember.
What's going on here? Does anybody see a trend? Age. Age. What's happening is we age, Stephen. What's happening is we age.
We've taken in too many toxins and stresses. And
Yeah, there's toxins that we're exposed to. I mean, atmospheric oxygen is affecting us. We're being oxidized by the air that we breathe. But the thing that's changing the most is our body's ability to change how we respond to the toxins, to atmospheric oxygen, to ski accidents, to everything that we encounter becomes more difficult for our body to adapt to every year. And that feeling of, oh my God, I don't feel like I'm in my 30s anymore. Or I don't feel like I'm in my 20s anymore. Or, oh my God, I'm in my 20s. When I was a little kid, I felt so good. All of those changes are because our ability to express genes is changing. Every year, our ability to express genes is becoming more and more limited. When we first popped out of the uterus, our ability to express genes was infinitely greater than it is our last day that we're here. And what I mean by express genes is our genes contain information. The shamans used to think that our genes were a song, and they may be right. And that information contained in our genes is expressed in proteins. And when that expression of information from the genes and the proteins happens in a smooth, elegant process, we feel good, we can adapt, and things are pretty groovy. When that expression from information in DNA to our proteins becomes clunky and oxidized and it doesn't work as efficiently as it used to, we start to feel, oh, wow, can you see how I'm punching over? My posture is horrible, and this gray hair. I don't think I even smell good anymore. That will be our, but I think I'm going to have an hour to talk about all that.
You get a half an hour.
But before we talk about mindless methylation, there's a PBS special I would love everybody to watch. It's called Cracking the Code.
Cracking the Code, is that right?
If you go to the PBS website and you type in DNA and methylation, it's a really beautiful walk through. There's a lot more issues to genetics than just expression. There's emotions that go with this. And I think it's important to come into this with a really broad picture because...
And I'm going to give you guys the next page up. This is a bunch of resources that you might want to be digging around before the next talk on April 1st. That's going to give you a little more of a launching pad from this, short little tidbits.
All right, and that's where I'm going to quit.
I love it. This is perfect. And then we'll have Oli, if someone just wanted to run across the room flapping your arms, that would be Oli's presentation. He's going to teach you some concepts of, many of you have taken his Qigong courses, and he's just an incredible gifted teacher and healer, but he's bringing, kind of taking that heady concept that Steve's going to bring into the mix on the first, and then bring it into the body and integrate it a little bit better for you. And then Julia and Boom are going to be doing a very powerful talk on emotional impact on present and future generations. Would you either of you like to dive in on that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm personally presenting the concept of home. So looking at the emotional environment of your childhood home and how that's influenced your belief systems and how that's influenced your diet and lifestyle and ultimately your epigenetics. Looking at current home situations, and then expanding out and looking at the broader concept of home in terms of nurturing, safety, and a sense of belonging. So that's what I'm doing.
And didn't you also just do yesterday on KBUI?
Oh,
little
yeah.
spiel.
Yeah. I was on the radio.
It
was fun.
Apparently it was taped to try to a little further. It was about the lecture series, so a discussion about what we're up to and what she's up to specifically in her practice and the talks coming up. But did they have an opportunity to have it linked to us to have on the website as well?
I had it sent to me. I don't know what to do with it
I
though.
think we've got 20 somethings on our stuff, Sarah. Okay. Great.
Okay, segue to me. I'm going to open up my family's personal experience to you all on changing our SNPs. So I went ahead and did the test for my whole family, and we have some SNPs to work on and address. And so I'm going to put them through that torturous process and report back to you. Yeah. So, and the reason is that I think what excites me most about this work is how we can, as much as we've sort of taken away from the current generation with our lifestyle habits in the past, how much we can actually give back by manipulating some of the SNPs and the way that these genes are expression.
And then I'll let you speak for you and Tracy's work on the trauma piece.
Yes, so Tracy and I, Tracy's one of our IV nurses, we're going to speak about trauma. So that's physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and any of the above combinations. And certainly there's a lot of evidence now that young kids who go through trauma when they're young and early adults like in war or sexual abuse, that kind of thing, that sets up our genes in a certain way in this fight or flight or freeze, which then can make it harder to cope with either stresses, normal stresses, so to speak, or trauma later on, and also set us up for not being able to really use our food well. And then there's also very interesting, not so much evidence, but kind of anecdotal stories of people who've used their trauma and really turned it around with all kinds of forgiveness. And that doesn't mean that you let somebody off the hook, but just an understanding of where all of this comes from, and then how we can use that to actually improve ourselves, to help us cope, to help us give back in ways that are richer than had we not had that happen. And certainly we don't recommend people go through trauma, but that is, as a human being, that's what we experience a lot of time. And so trying to understand how we can change that, change ourselves, change other people we know who've had trauma, the linear kind of effect that happens from families, we can really change that, and that's what we want to talk about.
And then last but not least, the series will kind of culminate with, to me, one of the juiciest topics, and we tend to talk about this a lot in our practice and in all of our lectures. So what you'll find with all of the research being done in the world of epigenetics is that you really cannot change your gene expression without changing your diet. I know everyone's like, shoot! And so some of the most famous minds in this area of study right now are really saying you really have to think differently about how you feed your body and to change this, because it's all the cofactors that Steve will talk about. But I know that Jeff and Stacey are going to go into greater detail. I'd love for you guys to talk more.
Well, I'm going to talk about a couple different modern food systems, the processed foods, the over-pesticided foods, and the well-traveled foods, and how those three different things are really impacting. There's a lot of research there about how we're passing that on to our offspring. So looking at research about mothers who are pregnant, passing those genes on to their babies, because I feel like for us, we end up getting the downstream. And a big part of what we want to do is to impact the upstream. So it may put us all out of a job, but the idea is to bring health and vitality to the next generation. So things that we can do kind of in response to those three different food systems is you know, things that we should be eating, because what we're finding in the research, and this is where I'm really finding my niche, is with the microbiome, like what Nisha was talking about, and how we are one part human and 10 parts bacteria. And the way that our bacteria that is involved in our gut and our skin, that we're finding impacts how our mood and our ability to lose weight, and whether or not we get exposed to diseases or not. So kind of tying food back into how our microbiome functions, and I'm going to be sharing some personal test results of microbiome. So that's what I'm looking at, and biorhythms, microbiome. Can't wait.
So environmental toxin exposure has been kind of a passion of mine for more than a decade. So some of you might have heard me talk about it before, but we're continually learning more and more about some of the toxins in the environment, and then it really overlaps into food. So I'm kind of glad that we're tag teaming this one, because it's kind of hard to talk about one and not the other. But I'm going to try to make it so it's not all gloom and doom, because I know every time I sit in one of these conferences myself, it's all about, oh, and now we can't eat this, and now we can't do that, and now we do this. So I don't want everybody to leave thinking, well, great, now, you know, what do we do? Just don't do anything. So that's the last thing I'm on. So, you know, trying to kind of make it a little bit lighter, but yet, you know, just know how important it is.
I can't get this last slide back up. I'm sorry. I was trying to be all discreet, but it didn't work. But basically, what each of us, our goal, thanks to feedback from a lot of you over the years we've done lectures, is we know we have the passion and the knowledge, and we want to tell you everything that is in our head, and that is sometimes a scary place to be. And it can definitely overwhelm, and I've looked out many a time to faces that were, I think people had really left the building hour and a half when they walked in here. So we're trying to take what's very kind of heady, chemical, new research information and make it very real life, very applicable to take home from an evening after a discussion like this and start to think about it. So your process tonight is more of just getting washed over some general definitions, some general ideas and concepts, get a sense that when in doubt, think Little House on the Prairie, go back, maybe you'll be humming it in the days to come, and think about what's different between these two places. Maybe start to look into the pile of resources that I'm trying to bring up on the screen for you. This, by the way, is going to be put up on our website tomorrow morning. The taping of it, the recording of it, as well as the slides of this. If you don't have a chance to write everything down furiously, it's going to be there. We hope to have every one of these taped each and every time. I killed the computer. I'm really good with people, not so much technology. But basically, we're trying, at each and every time you come to one of the talks, we want you to leave with a good, good couple of pearls, a couple of really good resources to take in and implement in your own life and share that with the people you love. And Jess, I love how you said that really our goal is we kind of are like, oh my God, I'm at the bottom of the pool now. We are really trying to turn it around, because you can change it within yourself in this moment, but you can absolutely impact the future generations. And so we're trying very hard to create a place of hope versus Debbie Downer of all of this. But in the last few moments, while I pull this slide up for the very last one, are there any specific burning questions or anything that you really hope that you might see in the next few weeks that we've got time to pull together for you? Thank you. Bueller?
I just wanted to ask you, if you're not able to make it to every talk, are you going to have it?
Yeah, it's going to be tape recorded inside every one of the talks, so that we want this information to be available. 95% of my patients don't live in Durango, so they're all literally knocking down the phones as we speak. Like, is this up yet? They'll be calling Sid at 7:35 to see if it's on the website. So, but we really want it to be available to you, or if this was helpful for you tonight and you want to share with other people here that can't come. I feel like maybe even tonight's talk would be a good precursor to anybody else coming back, just so we don't have to be like, what's epigenetics? or what's methylation? I mean, each of these topics will kind of build. By the time Steve launches into kind of the heady stuff on the first, you guys will hopefully have had a few more opportunities to see this. If you don't, if life is busy and it causes you stress and duress, please do not feel like, well, I can't go now, I didn't do my homework, because it will build. And Steve, if you've not experienced his work, he's a great teacher, and he can take really challenging topics and make them very digestible. So that is where we wanted to leave off with you tonight, and look very much forward to spending the next couple months with you in the evening. Like I said, we'll all get our orange glasses on and stare at each other soon. Anything you guys would like to add for the group?
Any more questions about things you'd especially like to know about, or things that would especially be interesting?
There's so much.
Yeah.
Dan?
Well, I'm just curious, is having these little snips common?
Yeah, we all have them.
All humans,
All
or is
humans.
it just if, you've got dealt a bad hand or something?
All of it. And so Steve is going to have a couple of case studies up so you can actually see what the SNPs look like when he does his presentation, right? Oh yeah, we're going to have Julia up there. And it's kind of neat because you'll be like, oh, when Steve and I first looked at Julia and Ben's, the husband-wife team of their genes, we could almost guess exactly what the boys were going to be. By the time we got their spit back, we already had a really good idea. Because it is a spit test, the 23andMe. These are why I thought you guys could go into maybe the history of a little bit of where 23andMe came from. This is a fascinating article. Did anybody read this Fast Company article that came out in November? I literally just completed a Women in Cancer retreat in North Carolina and was in the airport and saw the picture of Anne Wojcicki on the cover. I'm like, that's the 23andMe lady, and picked it up I would never in a million years read Fast Company. And so when I picked it up and read this, it was a fantastic article in history of DNA testing and methylation and epigenetics, and how their whole goal is to change the world as we know it. I mean, talk about a lofty goal. They are on to something huge. That's precisely why the FDA came down on them in early December, but that has not stopped their process. They just can no longer basically tell people, oh, you've got this higher percentage of having diabetes.
Can I talk a little bit about that?
Really quick, yeah.
So the reason that 23andMe got in trouble with the FDA is because they were making structure function claims without any scientific backing. And so I agree with the FDA on that. 23andMe should not be telling you that based on your SNPs, you've got an 83.5% chance of having breast cancer. I'm the perfect example of that. If you look at my oldest brother, redhead, 6'3", and we pretty much have been mistaken for each other my entire life since I've been an adult. He died of pancreatic cancer in his 50s. He was diagnosed in his early 30s. I turned 45 at the end of this month, and not before my stupid talk. But the point is, our epigenetics are what we're born with. It's what we're going to take to our grave with us, but it doesn't doom us to any fate.
That documentary really shows that, because a lot of this information we've learned from multiples, from twins and triplets.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
one twin getting cancer and the other one not. They have the identical DNA. There's not a single piece of DNA that differs in identical twins. And yet they don't get the same illnesses. They don't necessarily die of the same things.
I just want to put it out there that anyone can order this test. You don't need to come into Namaste and get any of us to order it for you. You can go to 23andme.com. It's only $99. And so it might be really helpful if you haven't run this test on yourself to do it, because then it will really bring home a lot of what we're talking about as far as SNPs. So for $99, this is an incredible test.
And it used to be, what, 700?
Well, actually, when you read the history, it's amazing, because when the same amount of gene sort of testing was done on her husband, the head of Google, or now soon to be ex-husband, but yeah, at that time, He ran his whole DNA sequence for about $100,000. That's what he did then. But, you know, it was Google, so that's what you can do. So when she got excited, she always wanted to go to medical school. She was very interested in genetics, very interested in biology, and met this guy who was doing DNA testing and got excited when they first presented this, and I think 2006 is when it first came on the market. The test was way cheaper at about $5,000 to do the sequencing. So they gathered about 20,000 samples at that time. And then they realized they still needed more, and they still wanted to make it more available, so they cut it down to a couple of thousand, and then over time down to 1,200, and then over time down to 500, and it wasn't until December 2012, 2012, that she said, oh my God, we've got $1 billion company here that is going down fast, because we can't, you know, we've got this technology and we're not paying for it, and we need to make this, we want to change things, but you have to have enough samples to do so. So we're going to bite it. We're going to sell these kits for $99. If it's in your same household, any second, third, fourth kits are $79, okay? So she said, we just want samples because we want to start to impact it. FDA never said a word until they started getting closer to their $1 million goal. And that part of what her discussion is that she has been approached by tons of pharmaceutical companies to buy the data, because right now the hottest, you know, treatment in the world of cancer is one protein, one targeted therapy. It doesn't work that way. There's no such thing as one problem. So they were going to take all that data and basically clear out all of the rest of the information. Whereas she's like, no, we are complex, you know, human beings with all these other things coming in. We need to look at it as a whole. And it's from this work that now they're getting tons and tons of research coming out of this data. So this is what's incredible. It is literally changing medicine as we know it. I am very excited about this work, and it's changed since we started using this in our practice at the end of the summer into the early fall. It's absolutely changed my oncology practice drastically. It's changed my personal health and my husband's health, and everyone in the office has now run it, or it's pending, it's on its way in, so we're just like, this is crazy what we're learning. But basically, these are people that have been working with it for a long time, like Dr. Benjamin Lynch and Amy Yasko, and their work initially was with folks with autism. That's where they started, because the only gene they really knew of then was, well, if I say the MTHFR gene, what first comes to mind when you see that? We actually had what we called MTHFR Saturday at my house recently, but we didn't call it that, where all the office hung out for an entire day together doing an entire webinar on this, because it's so life-changing. So these guys have been at this work for a very long period of time. If you go into our side blog, which is very specific to our oncology patients, but for everybody, go into intuitiveterrain.com. If you go into the search engine and type in methylation or epigenetics or Steve's name or anything, you're going to pull up a lot of great research articles, resources, great little short, like 7-minute videos on methylation, lots of really cool things to also get you a little more comfortable with the dialogue we're going to be having. And then just in November, December was a great article in The Optimist, which we carry in our office. And I think you've got extra copies up at the desk. Sierra, I think you're the Gene Genie. Really good. And this kind of brings in, sheds light on how the Angelina, they actually called it on the cover of Time magazine, the Angelina Jolie effect, because that's what it was. And it did set us back a bit, but they kind of have navigated that territory with this article in Gene Genie. And then if you just want a deeper, fun read on how our thoughts literally change our epigenetic terrain, The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton is a pretty fascinating book. Has anybody here read that book? It's amazing. And so these are just some resources to kind of whet your palate and get you excited for what's to come. We'd love to have you and more. And if you can't be here, we're going to have them all taped. But how are you guys feeling? No one looks too scared. Are you ready to take this journey with us? Yeah, great. I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks so much for being here tonight.